let's move to Israel and Gaza. At least 42 people have died and many more are injured following two Israeli strikes in Gaza City, according to the Hamas-run government media office. Let's get the latest now with Noga Tarnopolsky, an Israeli-Palestinian journalist based in Jerusalem. Noga, good afternoon. Lovely to hear from you.
Good afternoon.
Tell us the latest on the strikes. 42 people are reported to have died.
Right. What we know on the Israeli side, after waiting quite a bit, is that this was what they're calling a targeted strike against one of the Hamas leaders, and they announced a similar one in Lebanon also today, where we don't yet have a number of casualties. A car was hit, and this is part of the IDF's general policy of trying to eliminate the Hamas leadership that were behind the attacks of October 7th. Apparently in Gaza City, there are several dozen killed. We don't yet know. Yesterday, the Palestinian Red Crescent Society said that 25 people had died without specifying who they were. And today, as you just said, the number has gone up significantly, but there's no corroboration, and the Israelis are simply ignoring all of these reports.
Let's look at the Prime Minister Netanyahu. It's been reported that he's walking a bit of a tightrope as the US are urging a Gaza ceasefire deal. Last time we spoke, he had lost a member of his war cabinet. What is the state right now in Israeli top politics? Is Netanyahu still able to have the support of those around him politically and also the support of the people?
Netanyahu appears to have definitively lost the support of the Israeli people. Every single poll published since this war began and every single poll published in the last week shows a majority of around 70% think he should resign, either immediately or at the end of the war, which is a date he refuses to identify or fix. He is in the middle of a battle royal with the United States that he provoked, accusing the Biden administration that has offered him unparalleled support, military support for this campaign, accusing them of of refusing to send Israel the armaments that Israel would need, quote, to win the war. He's basically blaming not winning the war on Joe Biden. The Israeli army this week simply launched an open response to their own prime minister, who has spent much of the past week, when he wasn't attacking his own ministers and attacking the American president, was attacking the army and blaming them somehow for what I guess he fears is being perceived among Israeli citizens as the lack of success. The principal reason for this lack of success is that Netanyahu refused to identify an endpoint for the war. He simply kept repeating and repeating to Israelis that he was going for, quote unquote, total victory. And in the lack of any definition, this war, which right now is more of a sort of, I would say, combat maintenance situation and not really an active war in Gaza, is self-perpetuating. So he is, you said, walking on a tightrope. He's walking on a tightrope with the abyss on one side, and it's unclear what he has on the other side. He's bleeding support, except still, even though it's fragile, except still among his own ministers and the coalition that keeps on propping him up.
Noga, you mentioned earlier the missile strike in Lebanon. A lot of people are concerned that a new battlefront might crop up between Hezbollah and Israel. Do we know any more? Is that likely?
It's possible, I would say. It is definitely possible. Hezbollah is playing with fire because it has been firing on the Israeli north nonstop, constantly, now for days. The area is simply, the entire north of Israel, the entire Galilee, for anyone who knows it, is completely unlivable right now. One of the reasons Hezbollah has been doing this is a huge error committed, a strategic error committed by the Israeli government at the beginning of the war, when they feared a sort of that Hezbollah would replicate the sort of attack Hamas had committed in the south of Israel. And they ordered the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of residents. Anybody living within, I think it was 5 kilometers of the border, which includes a major city of Kiryat Shmona, another city, Metula, like an entire swath of land that Israel has relinquished. And all of these people remain internally displaced within Israel. Because that area was emptied by the Israeli government, Hezbollah can permit itself to lob hundreds of missiles in and consider it just a threat because there's no one there to kill. And so it's a really terrible cycle right now. Israel can't return its population up north because there are rockets falling there every day. No one would agree to return. Schools are not going to be able to open there at the end of the summer holiday simply because the infrastructure isn't there right now. And so Hezbollah continues to feel that there's a lower risk by attacking Israel because citizens aren't getting killed. For Israel, on the one hand, it feels a need to retaliate against Hezbollah, which is a complicated organization. You know, it's a terror group, but it's also part of the Lebanese government. And on the other hand, Netanyahu has some of his ministers, and they may include him, I don't know, who flat out want Israel to invade southern Lebanon and want Israel to launch a second front to this war. So all of this complication is flowing around. The United States sent an envoy here this week, Amos Hochstein, to try and stop this. The French government is deeply involved in trying to stop this, but neither one of the two sides seem particularly interested right now in de-escalation.
Now, the International Committee of the Red Cross says its offices in Gaza have been damaged by shelling on Friday, which killed 22 people who'd sought shelter around its compound. Let's speak to Zach Anders, who's a Middle East reporter. Morning, Zach.
Hi, good morning, Chloe.
So tell us, what do we know about this strike on the Red Cross offices in Gaza?
Yeah, and this is not far away from when last month we had that airstrike that the Israelis say were targeting senior leadership of Hamas that ended up killing 35 plus people. Gaza health authorities say, and dozens were injured in that airstrike. This is not far away from that. This is in an area that is primarily dominated by tents. This is where the Israelis have told people to go. Now, we don't know, and we're still waiting on the satellite images and to be able to geolocate this attack yesterday where some 25 dead, 50 wounded, Gaza health officials say. But it is believed that it's outside of the designated humanitarian zone, the Mawasi zone. But that doesn't make much of a difference because the Mawasi zone has swelled over this Rafah campaign to upwards of 1 million people. They're having incredible challenges with clean water, with there's no sewer system there. So a lot of these people are outside the Mawasi zone with their tent. I spoke to one of those sources that I've connected with throughout the war. She's 21. She said, I'll read the message she sent me this morning directly. Today, we experienced harsh and challenging moments. Israeli planes bombed the tents of displaced people, causing the remains of children, women, and elderly to scatter among the tents on the roads. It's truly devastating how quickly life can change, bringing pain and suffering. The pain of the airstrikes and the horrifying scenes, the fear and panic you see in everyone's eyes, and the repeated displacement are all unimaginable.
Gosh, and what's the Israeli response to why this attack was carried out and who they were targeting?
It was quiet on their end overnight, and the Times of Israel is now reporting in Israel that they are saying they're not sure that this was them that attacked this area. And it's also not clear what kind of ordnance was used, if this was a bomb dropped from a plane or if this was shelling. It's being reported as shelling on the ground. And we don't have a lot of visuals at this point in the day to be able to say for certain either. But through the Times of Israel, IDF officials claiming now that they are looking into the incident, but right now they're claiming that potentially it wasn't them.
Where are we at the moment with peace talks? You know, we keep having hope, don't we? Whenever we speak to you, Zach, we hope that it's a step closer to at least a temporary suspension of action within Gaza, maybe leading to a permanent ceasefire. Where are we on those talks?
Yeah, and that's hard to say. I mean, if last month this was the peace talks were on a lifeline, it's really hard to say now at this point, especially after the rescue operation to free those hostages from the Nusrat camp. The political environment inside Israel has changed remarkably. And the hard lines that both sides have set, Hamas saying complete withdrawal, the Israelis saying that's not going to happen, an end to Hamas is going to happen. So neither side has backed down. The U.S. has gone quiet. We had a lot of hopeful messages from the White House and from the State Department all throughout the month of May, saying that they thought both sides were close, that it was up to Hamas to agree to the deal. Well, they've been quiet at this last week, last 2 weeks. It really does not feel hopeful. And I think the more interesting element of the last 2 or 3 days has been watching a bit of a spat between the IDF spokesperson and apparently the Netanyahu administration themselves. So it's been really a challenging couple of days, and it really does not seem hopeful.
There is, of course, the challenge politically as well for Benjamin Netanyahu. The fact that his war cabinet has broken up after Benny Gantz decided to walk away. In real, I guess the real implications of that are what? Because Netanyahu is saying he's still going to consult people. Does it change the realities of the war on the ground?
No, and what it does do is really every decision made going forward is going to be very clearly the Netanyahu administration's. There was, over the course of this conflict, a bit of a shield for him where he could say this was a joint decision that we made together as a unity government. My opposition party came together and we're making these decisions and we have the same war aims. Now it's very clear that Benny Gantz is going a different direction after leaving this cabinet and has been openly criticizing the war policies, openly criticizing that there is no day after plan for Gaza still. And the protests that have been taking place throughout Israel. There's been what they're calling a week of disruption the last week. Protests all across the country. I was at one of them in the south. It's remarkable to see the a swell of people from really across the political spectrum who are now coming out demanding elections, demanding an end to the Netanyahu government. But when we were in the South and we were meeting with some of the people who were survivors of October 7th, and they were at this protest and they had been in those kibbutzes and had friends and neighbors that were killed. And their messaging is still so pointed at, we have one figure in this government who at this point in the conflict has not accepted responsibility or said that they played or owned up to the moment that this, he was in charge on that day when this happened. And so it's still remarkable to see that at this point in the conflict, Netanyahu is still not accepting responsibility or really shouldering any of the blame for what happened on October 7th.